This week in Pure Reinvention.
People have choices when it comes to work. And just because you're moving downtown doesn't mean that everyone will come work for you.
Episode 158, the Compuware relocation story with Marlin Williams, diversity entrepreneur in residence for Techtown Detroit.
Engage, disrupt, adapt, repeat. You're listening to Pure Reinvention, the podcast for curious people.
Bonifer, I found this story absolutely amazing. Marlin Williams and the Compuware relocation story. What would you recommend some of the listeners really kind of pick up on as they start to approach this podcast?
Well, I found Marlin's story inspiring, mostly for this theme around fear. She found a way to help those employees own their fear. She also guided them through that process, right? The whole process.
Sure.
She also had this really interesting knack for reinventing herself throughout her career, which comes through in the interview. So I hope listeners will listen for that.
That's really key in the reinvention process, right? The executive in first.
Right.
Yeah, let's listen.
This week's episode is sponsored by HRM Services, providing solutions that work. HRMS provides customized human resource consulting services to fit the unique needs of their clients. Every client has a story, and they make it their business to learn yours. Contact HRM Services today at 517-974-8033 or visit their website at hrmservices.biz.
We're here with Marlin Williams. You have a background with a couple of major Fortune 500 companies.
Yes.
Both of them in Detroit.
Yes, both are in Detroit, and I served as the final role in each company was their Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer. So I would just talk about one in particular, was Compuware Corporation. And Compuware Corporation is the place where I actually learned to code. So,
Which you hadn't had that skill before.
No, I graduated from college, and my journey through college is probably another podcast.
Yeah.
But when I finally finished.
We'll have you back then.
Yeah. When I finally finished from Wayne State University, I was an aspiring mortician and a substitute teacher. So I was actually, learning to embalm people in the evening and teaching middle school during the day. And someone told me about Compuware Corporation, which I've never heard of Compuware. And they said, hey, you have a degree. You can learn to code in 7 languages in 13 weeks. And they're paying $24,000. I'm like, oh my God, I'm rich. I was 25 at the time and I was still living at home. So I'm like, I don't know what this is, but I'll do it. And that's how my career at Compuware started. So I started as a mainframe programmer.
Okay, just using the word mainframe dates you, by the way.
Oh, yeah. ATM machines are my best friend.
So Compuware owned by?
Peter Kermanos.
Who's had a dramatic influence in the reinvention of downtown Detroit. Mm-hmm. Moved his company down here, but he found there was a challenge.
Yes. So it was really interesting because I had just taken another position. I was like, you know what? I'm going to go work somewhere else because I've been there almost 10 years. And I'm like, I want to just do something else. And I'm like, Pete, I have to go.
Away from Compuware.
From Compuware.
Or Compuware.
And I knew that they were, and then he called me to his office and said, hey, look, we're moving down.
Okay, this is the head.
Yeah, of Compuware.
Of Compuware. Not 6 supervisors deep.
No, which is the wonderful thing about him is that he had this open door policy, but with my personality, I think he had no choice. Sometimes he would just laugh at me like, what did you just say to me? And
I would guess that, yeah.
Well, I just want to tell you the truth. This is how I feel.
I'm telling you just like you're my neighbor, not that you're the boss 10 levels up.
Yes, so we just had a great relationship. And so the ask was stay.
He asked you to stay.
Until we moved downtown Detroit.
And he knew there was a reason he needed you.
There were a few reasons. One is the major reason was you have a base of people who are used to coming to Farmington Hills. A lot of people didn't live in Detroit, and all you knew about Detroit
they lived
is what
in the
you
suburbs.
heard in the media, right? And so
this is what year?
This was 1990. Or was it 2000 maybe?
Okay, right around that time frame.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because we were one of the first. We were the first major
absolutely
to build down here.
Absolutely.
And so we have this exciting thing going on, but there was just this fear. People had a fear about what would happen if my car broke down on the expressway. Will I get carjacked?
Do you think it was an unfounded fear?
I don't think anything's unfounded.
Right.
And
There was a reason they felt that.
Yes. And as a diversity and inclusion professional, there has to be a certain level of empathy, and you also can't take things personally.
Right.
I lived in Detroit, and I'm like, I've never been carjacked. I've never been robbed. There are some parts of the town you just don't go.
Were you raised in Detroit?
I have been born and raised, educated Detroit.
Okay. So you were
schools,
comfortable with
everything.
Detroit.
I'm comfortable with Detroit. There are some areas I probably wouldn't be comfortable.
Right.
And then
I learned that from Sonia.
Yeah. That had to be the conversation. Like, you're not going to get carjacked, but your perception is your reality.
Like
So
everywhere in the world, you got to
yeah.
know where to be and where not to be.
Right. They're like, my baby, if I drive my baby downtown with me every day because we opened a daycare,
Oh, sure.
are they going to be safe? Well, buckle them in the car seat. I mean, what else do you think? People aren't
Yeah.
stealing babies.
Yeah.
You're going to be fine.
But Mr. Carmanis needed you
Yes.
to help people through this phase
Mm-hmm.
where they were basically didn't know about
They just didn't.
directly, right? They were
Right.
indirectly had heard all this stuff, and your role was to help them navigate successfully through that time.
Exactly. Help them to navigate successfully through that. But what's also interesting is that you're coming to Detroit, and if you were to look at the racial makeup of our company, it didn't look like Detroit. So that's a whole
Actually, probably the exact opposite.
Yeah. So that was an entirely different issue. So from a racial perspective and a gender perspective in technology, you didn't see a lot of me. And so we had to help. I had to even help our recruiters to say, how do you cast a wider net? How do you look at diversity and inclusion differently so that you can attract the people who are diverse to come work with us?
So phase one of this conversation was how do we make the Farmington Hills employees comfortable working downtown?
Yes.
And then phase two was how do we build a company that has more diversity and inclusion?
Yes. Now, there's also a phase three. Let me sink that in real quick. So the phase three was how do we show that we are a company that's inclusive so that people
Okay.
will want to work
So
for
phase
us?
one, which is how do we move downtown? Phase
Yes.
two, how do we become more diverse? And then phase three, how do we show others?
Yeah, foster an environment of inclusion.
Yep.
So I would say we start with the phase one. It was just really, it was interesting because I had never thought, for me, coming in from Detroit every day was just what I did. And I just showed
Kind of
up.
normal.
Yeah. But I think it was really telling for some when you were able to tell stories about being African American and my level of uncomfort to come to your city. And does that mean that everyone in your city is racist? No. Does that mean that there's someone who may not want me there? Well, of course. But I think that there are more people that would welcome me than those who don't. And so it was kind of like those type of stories and saying, hey, you're going to be fine. But then it came to a point where like, you know what, if you can't get past this, then this just may not be the place for you too. So it was a lot of those tough conversations.
So actually they had to start owning it. If they were actually going to be a part of it, they were going to have to own this next phase.
Or not. Yeah.
So how did you then help the company move into a new culture where in this new environment they needed to position themselves with more diversity and inclusion? How did you help them with that?
Well, we were able to, have activities in Detroit so that people could go and just kind of be in the city, be downtown, kind of touch and feel and experience to know that it's going to be.
That is so cool.
Okay.
Touch, feel, and experience where you're going to be.
Yeah, this is where you're going to be. And know that you're going to be just fine.
We can learn to love it.
Yeah, and learn to love it. And I know when we moved downtown, people loved it. They really did. And another thing that I have to say that Pete was so amazing in that he was able to listen to employees. So as we were moving, we were able to say, hey, listen, there are some people who live far away from Detroit. Would you consider having a daycare in the school?
Marlon, how many employees are we talking about at the time?
There may have been 3,000. It was small.
Well, 3,000 compared to
3,000.
some would be very small. But for many of our listeners who are
Okay.
trying to think about how you influence, here's an influencer trying to influence 3,000.
Yes.
Right, and that's a very, very large group.
Yeah. Well, it seemed small at the time. I mean, it was 3 floors in our Farmington Hills building, and down this campus. When we moved to Campus Marshes, it's just this monstrosity of a building, So I like 3,000 people, and understand we had professional services, which these were people who were out at different clients. And so even talking to them, so to say, hey, you don't even have to come downtown. So what are you talking about? Like, you are working for the automotives or you're working for the banking. Like you're a consultant for us to them. But, trying to make everyone feel comfortable and to know that this is your new home and everything from, one thing that Pete did that I thought was great. We had a cafeteria in Campus Marsh's building that was amazing, but it was wonderful. However, he would not subsidize it. And he did that on purpose so that people would get out and explore the different restaurants in the city. And I thought that was a hard stance for him to take, but it was amazing because then people would get up from their desk. It's like, think about it. People, they would go in the garage, go to their desk, eat inside. We had a beautiful
They were insulated.
gym. They didn't have to go anywhere.
They were insulated.
Right.
So he was trying to integrate this company into the culture of downtown. And
Yes.
so you were helping with the diversity and inclusion piece because you knew that in order for it to be successful, not only did it need to integrate, but you needed to make decisions about its future so that it started to look like and be downtown.
Yes. And just, people have choices when it comes to work. And just because you're moving downtown doesn't mean that everyone will come work for you. People are going to look and they want to feel the energy of the company. They want to know that they are included. They want to see people who look like them. In the
Look like them,
company.
act like them, like to make their own choices like them, right? All of those things go into inclusion.
Yes. We even had to talk to people about you're going to go outside the door and there's going to be homeless people. How do you handle that? How do you treat them with dignity? What does that look like for you? We promise they aren't going to eat you. It's going to be okay. But those were real conversations. And I felt that people weren't making it up. It probably was one of the times in my life where I grew the most.
Because it was so genuine?
It was genuine and I had to listen and I had to be okay with hearing some things.
You were on a big journey yourself then.
Yeah, I didn't even know it.
And not until later did you even
Right. 'Cause
know
remember,
it.
I quit. I was leaving. And so
Yeah.
I was
So
starting
you
another
thought.
journey. Yeah. But I'm so happy that he saw something in me to say, you know what? You can help with this. And they gave me the budget and they gave me the staff. And I believe that our move was very successful. But
He had individuals like
too.
you
Thank you.
who were helping to lead very specific initiatives.
Yes.
And because he had that core group of leaders like you, he put the future of his company in very good hands.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, it's very obvious to see that when you see the passion and the intent that you had something that he didn't have and he needed from you to do this very special work.
Right.
And as it turns out, that is actually the kind of work that you have owned for the majority of your career.
Yes, definitely. It's one of those things you just can't get away from, no matter how hard you try. Because diversity and inclusion, I told my daughter one time, sometimes I come home, I feel like I've just been on a freedom bus. I mean, I feel like I am back in time and history because some of the conversations can be exhausting. Or trying to get people to understand, or even dealing with unconscious bias and some very conscious bias. It's a labor of love at this point.
Marlon, as I listen to the professional journey that you have, there's a lot of very important positions, but I know that you didn't go from just being a mortician by training into coding. There had to be a whole series of steps in between. Can you
Yes.
talk about the importance of being on a journey of continuous improvement and how you were able to apply that within your own career goals?
Yeah, for sure. So when I started at Compuware, like I stated, I was a mainframe programmer. From there, my skills were honed and I started to go out to different companies for Compuware. So I did a lot of automotive type programming and a lot for banking and Grand Trunk, which was a train system back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
So from there, they made me an instructor. So then I started to instruct people. And then they put me over the entire program. So at that point, Compuware would pay 100% tuition. So I went back and got my master's.
So you took advantage of all those
took
opportunities.
advantage of all of that. It was interesting because I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. So my master's from University of Detroit Mercy was a master's in liberal arts studies with an emphasis in sociology. Okay. But Then I was interested we had a training program, the training program at Compuware. But what was interesting, we didn't have anything, and I didn't know it was called organizational development at the time, but around leadership development, succession planning, how people, career paths and outplacement services. So because I was asking all those questions, I said, hey, you can help us to start the organizational development department. So through DePaul University, I went back and got certificates in organizational development with an emphasis in succession planning, leadership development, and diversity and inclusion.
Well, and I think the real lesson to be learned here is when you kind of distill all of that journey down, you can hear a few big stop starts, but the reality is in any reinvention journey, it's really a series of very small steps.
Yes.
All tied together because it's each of those small steps that we can make.
Yeah.
Now, you put 5 small steps together, now you have a big step. And we may talk about the big steps,
right,
but they always have this very long series of small steps in between that allowed you to get to that next big step.
And I'll say, you know what, outside of all the steps, the most important thing was to go back to this empowerment piece. I wasn't afraid to ask or to say, hey, raise my hand.
There, I think, is a real key, that I was not afraid to empower myself to go on the journey of self-improvement, self-discovery, professional development. And on that journey, I was able to run into all sorts of awesome things.
Because the worst thing that could happen is they would say no.
Because apparently the worst thing that you said to yourself, what's the worst thing that could happen?
Nothing.
And saying no is not a difficult thing for you and I to overcome.
That's right.
Bonifer, for 2018, we talked about the importance of owning reinvention as a real focus. And here we are, Marlin Williams, owning reinvention. Talk about that.
What a great story she gave us. The whole concept of the relocation of Compuware, she really helped those employees own their fear. She empathized with it. She acknowledged that it's valid. What an amazing gift she gave them, and then walked them through that, right? So she helped them make that transition. And the CEO really, he deserved a nod too, really making that space so that they had no choice but to own it.
Right. So Marlin Williams owned her own reinvention. So talk about how important it is for the executive to go in first.
Really remarkable what she did over her career to start from an undergrad in mortician sciences and be teaching middle school, 2 very different fields, and happening into this coding world that was new at the time. She seemed to, throughout her career, find the ability to leverage the skills and the background that she brought and really recreate herself to fit the circumstances that presented themselves to her.
So she was able to own that journey, right? And navigate those realities, which we all have the potential to do. I think we sometimes hold ourselves back because we don't give ourselves permission, or we can't overcome maybe the fear of doing new things. What I also heard you talk about, and I want you to spend some time and kind of expand on this thought. Marlin owned her own fear, which is one thing and important. Especially first. But you mentioned that Marlin made it safe and helped the employees that she worked with own their own fear and deal with that. What does that mean?
Well, so let's talk about Marlin's courage first. And there is definitely a difference between fearlessness and courage, right? So even when you're scared, you can move forward. That's courage. And she seemed to exhibit that courage on a regular basis throughout her career. I think that experience, her own willingness to face her fear, helped her empathize and validate those employees when they were fearful.
Now, help me understand this, but if you've never done that yourself, it's really hard to help others go through that.
Right.
That's why it's so important that the executive go first.
Yeah, I think it served her so well in this case. And even the way that she interacted with the CEO to a certain extent really blazed the trail so that she could have empathy for folks as they were going through this change.
Because probably that connection, the fact that she can recognize that as we go into this new space, it's a logical reaction to have some hesitancy or to have some fear of the unknown. She's able to not only understand that, but predict and prepare and then navigate successfully knowing those things.
Right. She used this phrase, perception is reality, and hopefully people have heard that already, but it's no more true than it is when you're talking about someone's fear.
Bonifer, do you think that there's a role for empathy in leadership?
Oh gosh, yes. I think it's at the heart of what we do as leaders.
How often does empathy show up in a master's program in terms of its importance as a core sense for doing your work?
I don't really know the answer to that question. I can speak to you about my own graduate experience, and there's a single class that I remember in graduate school that really emphasized caring about your employees, having empathy for your employees, but one out of how many?
But how incredibly intuitive was it for Marlon to understand that and to exhibit that in the appropriate way? What did you notice about what she was doing that made such a difference?
She just had this uncanny ability to take what she was given or what she had experienced and really turn it into something fruitful for those people around her.
Do you think Marlon is a unique example?
I'm a believer in people, so I want to believe that they have the potential. I think sometimes people just aren't aware or they don't give themselves permission.
Right, or we haven't had the opportunity to really explore what that means and how to use it, which really I keep going back to this as an example in Marlon. Her experience shows it so well. She had to be first in.
Yeah.
She had to recognize her own trepidation and fear with not knowing.
Right.
And working through that to really be able to then usher others along that same path. And that, to me, is the definition of empathy, because you, at your core, understand what it feels like to be unsettled.
Right.
To not know.
Right. And
be
to
unsure.
And to become okay with being unsettled.
And to move people from, I'm not sure, I'm a little fearful, whatever they may be, not even afraid, but I'm unsure.
Right.
And helping people find sure is such a wonderful concept for leaders to embrace.
Right.
In the world we live in today, almost everything we're beginning to experience is new and we have not seen before.
Right.
Which means a leader must have the ability to navigate into spaces that we're a little unsure of.
Right. I think it's important to, Marlon is a great example of someone, a leader who is willing to experience that, whatever it is, that newness first, so that she can bring that experience to her colleagues.
If you're ready for a change, make it a change that lasts. Make it Pure Reinvention.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Pure Reinvention. Keep the conversation going and get alerts when new podcasts are up by following us on Twitter at Pure Reinvention or sign up for our mailing list at purereinvention.com.